Well, good evening, everyone, again, and welcome back to Rightly Dividing the Word of Truth podcasts. It's been a couple of weeks, and I apologize for that because I really would like to get a podcast up on a weekly basis, and I will. Pretty soon, I'm going to be preaching through the book of Revelation, and I will be uploading a podcast, a summary of those sermons. Those sermons will basically be expository, that is, biblical exposition, essentially verse by verse, going through the entire book of Revelation. I will sum each chapter up and put it on a podcast. And I think it will really open your eyes to a lot of things, especially in the days we're living. That's coming up very soon in the month of November. For now, I just wanted to cover a few topics of interest. And as you know, one thing that kind of excites me is having questions answered about things in the Old Testament that give me problems, that cause me to scratch my head and say, why, God? I don't understand. You seem harsh at times, or, you treat women less of value than we do today. Well, it's not so much that God treats women of less value. It's that men treat women of less value, and laws of the ancient Near East reflected that. Okay? So one day, all those cultural things will be gone. And one day, all the differences, the subordination, and all the negative aspects of the fall of man will be gone. And we will all stand equal in heaven. As Ephesians says, there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor female, rich nor poor, but all, so male or female, but all will be the same in Christ. Right now we have roles. And there are role differences between men and women. Those don't change. But the way people treat women today definitely, as opposed to ancient culture, definitely has changed. Women in the ancient Near East, which, of course, Israel was a part, were not free for all intents and purposes. They were, in fact, the property of their husbands. You don't like that, but that's the way it was. Scholar Pamela Barmash says that the adult free man is the sole locus of legal action. In other words, all the ancient Near Eastern laws, those laws were created for the adult free male. And those laws reflected them. Those laws did not necessarily reflect women or children or people outside of that subcosm of people. Arthur Cook was a wonderful scholar back at the turn of the century, and he wrote this: the Semitic view is that marriage is instituted for the legal perpetuation of the husband's name and estate, and that the woman is a property which can be acquired by purchase, in return for which the buyer receives full marital rights. A daughter's value lay in the fact that she was an addition to her father's property. He received compensation when she married. Children added dignity and authority to the mother because it reduced the chance of her husband divorcing her. And that's the way they viewed it. So, in a nutshell, a woman was the property of a man. Now, obviously, there were laws protecting the lives of women in every culture, and particularly in Israel. But in a sense, a woman was obtained through a dowry price, and that's a purchase, essentially. And she became the property of her husband. At the time when Cook wrote his book, back at the turn of the century, the number one reason why women were divorced in the Muslim world was because of childlessness. And they could take and divorce their wives and marry other wives if they didn't bear them children. Back in 2012, an incident happened. It gained national attention. 5 or 6 Indian men, their names were Mukesh Singh, Vinay Sharma, Akshay Thakur, Pawan Gupta, and 2 other Indian men, were charged with the rape and murder of a 23-year-old physiotherapy student in a moving bus in Delhi. She was with her boyfriend. They got on the bus, and this bus was filled. I don't know whether they were Hindu or Muslim, but they were Indian. They beat her boyfriend senseless and raped her for hours. They did vile things to her, left her on the side of the road, which she later died. They hung 5 of the 6 at the time of this writing of this article. 5 of the 6 were dead. 4 of the 4 I mentioned above were hanged in 2015. 1 committed suicide in jail, and the 6th was only a minor, and it was released after 3 years. But one of the perpetrators said this. Notice his attitude. He says, quote, "A decent girl will not roam around at 9 o'clock at night. A girl is far more responsible for rape than a boy. Housework and housekeeping is for girls, not roaming in discos and bars at night, doing wrong things, wearing wrong clothes. The death penalty would make things even more dangerous for girls. Now, when they rape, they will not leave the girl like we did. They will kill her." That's what this guy's defense is. It's the girl's fault. It's not ours fault. She was dressed rather provocatively with her boyfriend on this bus, and she provoked us. And if she was a good girl, she wouldn't be doing that. She'd be home doing housekeeping, et cetera, et cetera. Now, because you've instituted the death penalty, now things are going to get worse, because now when people rape her like we do, they'll just kill the girl. Well, they left the girl after they had their way with her, and she died anyway. So this guy's argumentation, of course, falls on deaf ears to hear such a thing. But that's the attitude of much of the ancient Near East about the difference between men and women. Now, when Moses wrote the Pentateuch and the laws for Israel, when you read it, you will get the sense that some of that is in there. And it's true that women are the property of men. If not actual, then practically speaking, they're the property of men, and they can't. What you have to understand is that there was no place for women in the ancient world. They were homemakers, and that's basically all they were, with some rare exceptions. And they couldn't earn a living on their own. They couldn't make it on their own. And if they didn't have a husband or father or brothers to take care of her, she'd be out in the street. And you know what happens when girls are out in the street. That's how dire. That's the reality of the ancient world. There were no battered women shelters. There was no Department of Social Services. There was no adult protective. A woman and the law enforcement did not care. You were on your own. And if you didn't have a place, then you're out in the street. And with women, it meant prostitution. So it was extremely important for a woman to find a husband, to get married, for her protection. It was generally understood that unlike in our culture today, that when a young woman married, unless she was a widower, but when a young woman married, she was a virgin. If she was not a virgin in Israel, her chances of marriage was greatly reduced. So Moses wrote laws protecting unmarried women, so that their rights, so that you could not just divorce them for any reason. Now, we know the Jews, some of the Jews did that, because we know there are times where people just don't get along, and things are so hard, and people's hearts are so hard, and personalities so extreme that divorce is going to happen. And yes, Moses permitted people under those circumstances divorce. But Jesus made it clear was God's intention from the beginning. And for those people who think they could divorce their wives for any reason and go marry another, they were committing adultery, and Jesus made that clear. The Lord wanted to protect young women, and so that's why he gave these stipulations. Now, the laws, therefore, were written accordingly. Jurisprudence in ancient Israel and in the ancient Near East considered the rape of unmarried women larceny rather than crimes of violence or sexual assault. We find that interesting. that today it's sexual assault. Back in that day, there were no penalties for sexual assault per se. It was for unmarried women. It was a crime of larceny. You stole something. You stole when you raped that girl. You stole from her ability to have a normal marriage, because now she's going to be passed over and she could end up on the street. You threatened her life by raping her. You stole from the father because he received a dowry price. It's very expensive to raise a child. And the dowry price meant two things. It compensated the father and the family for raising this girl, and it guaranteed the one paying that dowry price would take care of her. So when a woman was legally betrothed, though the marriage was not consummated, when the agreement was signed for her betrothal, it was to violate that was the same thing, even though they hadn't had sex yet. Violating that was just like violating a marriage, and the punishment was death. The Lord wouldn't have it. Now, there's a difference in penalty, however, in Israel for sleeping with a woman who is unmarried. If that woman, like I said, was betrothed and you slept with her, if it was consensual, and this betrothed woman willingly slept with another man, whether married or not, it was adultery, and both were put to death. Okay? If she was raped, of course, and she was out in the country, for example, the Lord Moses uses that geography to emphasize the fact that there are times when a girl is raped and there's nothing she can do about it. It's very clear. Scripture makes it clear that she did nothing wrong. Only the man is put to death. Now, that's rather cut and dried when you considered women who are betrothed, unmarried women who are betrothed, that if they're violated, that there's a serious crime. What about unbetrothed women? So single women who are not yet married and who have sex. Well, there are a few verses in here that address that, and we're going to take a look at those. Okay. Now, Exodus 22 says this. Exodus 22, verses 16 and 17. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed, and he lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay the money equal to the full bride price for virgins. So here's the case where, and the words in the ESV make it clear, because this is what this Hebrew word means. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed, he seduces her, gets her to sleep with him. The punishment is that he give the full bride price. Now, this is consensual. And while this woman may have been very naive and an easy target, still, she is culpable in it. She agreed. And the two of them, he has to give the full bride price, and he has to take her as his wife. Now, if the father's completely distrustful of this man, or for some reason he does not want to give, he doesn't trust him that he is going to take care of her, or for whatever reason, he still has to give the full bride price, but the father can refuse. And it'll just make it more difficult for her to remarry in the future, but it was still possible. All right. So that's an obvious case where a man sleeps with a woman. It's totally consensual, even though he seduced her. And that's fairly cut and dried. Now, here's another cut and dried one concerning a woman who is engaged, betrothed. Deuteronomy 22, verse 25. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. Okay? The Bible uses the term geographic terms to indicate that there are places where a woman is helpless and no one will hear her. And if no one hears her and she is sincere, and there's ways of finding that out, then only the man will die, and he will die because she is betrothed. Okay. Um, this word sees here, okay, is a strong word. But if in the open country a man seizes a woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. This word sees here is used in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14. It's used of, remember David's son Amnon? After David sinned with Bathsheba, he started to reap some of his just deserts. And his son Amnon was in love with his half-sister Tamar. Same father, different mothers. And Amnon deceived Tamar and said to his father David, "Could you please have my sister Tamar come over and help me? I'm lying in bed. I'm sick." And so Tamar agreed and went into his room, and he locked the door, and he uses the same word. He seized her. This word "seize" has the connotation in Hebrew of overpowering. It's definitely refers to rape. Okay? Now, another similar verse, a few verses later, and this is the real controversial one, and why I'm mentioning this. Same chapter, Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29, just 3 verses later, it says, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed, so this woman is eligible, okay? If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lies with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. Now, it's interesting about this, because you would say to yourself, wow, so this man meets this unmarried woman, and this woman who's free, who's not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her. Then the man gets to keep her. He pays the dowry price, perhaps a little stiffer than it would have been, but he pays the dowry price, and she's his wife, and he can't divorce her all his life. So you'd read this and say, well, I might be a loser, pardon the expression, and I want to get married, and no one will marry me because I'm such a loser. So what I'll do is I'll just go pick the most beautiful, eligible woman out there, wait for an opportunity, rape her, then I get to keep her the rest of my life. Is that what this verse is saying? Listen to how the NIV translate this. That was the ESV I just read. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give the father the dowry. Look at the NIV says, if a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her. So while the ESV is a little ambiguous, it just says seize. The NIV, in typical fashion, the NIV does some interpreting for us and interprets that word as rape. So if I'm reading the NIV, I'll really get the impression that, boy, this is a good deal for me. I'm a vile human being, and I'm going to pick the most beautiful, eligible woman out there, rape her, and I'm married. Pay the 50 shekels of silver, and I got a beautiful wife, and she's mine, and she's my property for the rest of my life. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of people who interpret that verse 28 just like verse 25. Remember, verse 25 is, but if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lays with her shall die. Verse 28, if a man seizes a virgin who is not betrothed, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give the father a young woman. So many people, many versions of the Bible and scholars treat this Hebrew word, exactly the same. That's both in both references, they assume it's rape. And let me give you some scholars you may not recognize these names, but if you're studying the Old Testament, these names will certainly come to your attention. Jack S. Deere, he taught at Dallas. Earl S. Calland, Merrill Unger, Ernest G. Wright, Eugene Merrill, J.G. McConville, C. Peter Craigie, etc. These are heavy hitters, some of the best Old Testament scholars of the last 50 years. And they translate this Hebrew word in verse 25 and 28 exactly the same as rape. Now, what is the deal here? Because if this word in verse 28 is referring to rape, then really it causes us to question, because it's simply not fair. This vile human being gets to rape the most beautiful girl, and he is rewarded with her in marriage the rest of his life simply by giving the girl the dowry. Now, granted, in that time, what was paramount is that the girl was taken care of. Even if the husband wasn't the best husband, excuse me, it's better than being out in the street and being prostituted, okay? So even not the best situation is far better than being out in the street. And so maybe someone of that day would say, well, it's not that bad. She has a home now the rest of her life. It doesn't matter. From our standpoint, she was violated, she was raped, and it simply doesn't seem fair. That's if, of course, this word sees in verse 28 in Deuteronomy 22 is the same as in verse 25. Remember, verse 25, clearly the word means rape. It has the connotation of overpowering, as when Amnon overpowered his half-sister Tamar and slept with her. Verse 28, however, the verb is not the same. It's a different Hebrew verb. Now, the question I ask is, why would Moses, writing this in verse 25, use one Hebrew word that clearly means rape, and then 3 verses later uses another word? And this other word, essentially, it seizes, and that's a good interpretation here, or translation, because it's just a general word for grabbing a hold of something. Like if I just grabbed a hold of a book, or Moses grabbed the stone tablets. It has the connotation of grabbing a hold of, but it does not have the connotation of overpowering. It is not there. There is a scholar by the name of Tikva Frymer-Kensky. She's an American Jewish scholar, wonderful Hebrew scholar. And she says this about verse 28, quote, "The action of the man is often translated rape, but the law lacks the word, the law lacks the word overpower, that the rape law just before it uses in Deuteronomy 22:25. She also adds, since the man did not approach her parents first, his seduction was abuse. However, the key word for rape, overpower, is not present. As with so many family laws in Deuteronomy, the law limits the authority of parents. The father must give the girl to her seducer. In effect, the law allows a couple to marry even when they know the father will not approve. They can force his hand by eloping. So Frymer-Kensky basically is saying that this is not rape at all, that this is a couple who meet each other. The man grabs a hold of her, but in the sense that they do so to evade the laws and the rights of the father so that they can elope. She might be taking a little bit of liberty there, but she brings a very good point regarding the word, that the word here in verse 28 does not have the sense of overpowering. It just has the sense of grabbing a hold. Katie McCoy is assistant professor of theology and women's studies at Southwestern Seminary, and she says this about this between verses 25 and 28. Thus, the verb used to describe the violation of an unbetrothed virgin does not necessarily the connotation of sexual assault. To reiterate, this is not to say that the woman was not mistreated or taken advantage of. She most certainly was. Yet one cannot construct the claim that biblical law required unbetrothed women to marry their rapists without noting that verses 28 and 29 do not include the term that denoted rape, which appears just 2 verses prior. I just said that. So McCoy brings up a very good point here, that while this is not rape, the woman still was taken advantage of and mistreated, because by the man doing that, he put this woman at risk. You have to understand, in the ancient world, women were very self-effacing, okay? They spoke only when asked to, and very rarely would they speak to a man out in public. Today in the Muslim world, a woman better not be talking to a man in any kind of a casual manner, in some countries, because she could be whipped or stoned for it. So it was very serious. Women in the ancient world were very self-effacing. And you can imagine a situation where a man approached a woman, seduced her, kind of overpowered her with kindness in a way. I wouldn't call it kindness, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. He kind of emotionally overpowers her, and she just goes along with it because she doesn't have any strong self-esteem, to say no. So this is not rape, but it definitely is taking advantage of this woman. Now, and that's why I think this verse says, if a man meets a virgin who is betrothed her and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found. Why does it say, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give the father, and they are found indicates that this is in some way, shape, or form consensual. So if it is consensual, it is not rape. So when you read the NIV and it says, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and rapes her and lies with her, and then the man who rapes her shall give the father of the young woman a dowry price, it does not say that. And these scholars, surprisingly, as great as scholars as these are, and how many versions, I could list them off to you, imply rape here in verse 28, when it is not rape. It is seduction of some sort, but in some way, shape, or form, it is mutual consent. And when the man does that, because he put this woman at risk, she has to become his wife. She got ripped off because now she could have gotten a much better deal if she waited on her father, and she could have gotten a better deal. He, in the sense, his punishment is that, okay, while he had a quick time with her, whether he love her or hate her, he has got to take care of her the rest of his life. You're not going to leave these young women left on their own to fend for themselves when no one will care for them. In the Muslim world today, again, it is terribly wrong, but just to give you an idea of the way they feel about things, a woman could be bona fide raped with no fault of her own. And her close family members, her brothers, may kill her out of honor killing because of the shame and the disgrace of her being violated, even though it is not her fault. That's cruel and insanity. Now, why did I come across and bring this discussion up? Because invariably, you will get someone who reads these verses. They will read a version or translation or read a commentary where it talks about how this man raped this woman. And yes, it is a good law because the woman is taken care of, and they don't think like we'd think today, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's wonderful. And there's an element of truth to that. But still, if it's rape, it's sexual assault. And the fact that this woman, who might be utterly devastated and horrified, violated and horrified by the thought of having to marry this man, biblical law does not mandate that. Okay? In that case, we'd have to go with Exodus 22. The man would, and I'm not sure, that would probably go before the elders, and the man would be put on trial for whatever punishment, lex talionis, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Definitely he would have to pay the dowry price, but I'm sure there would be probably lex talionis. It was assault. He would probably be whipped. That's my guess. It doesn't specify here. These are these verses just cover ordinary life, the things that happen. It happens that men and women who are not married meet each other and they make mistakes, they sin, and they sleep with one another, and it happens all the time. And there has to be laws safeguarding and protecting the women in these societies when they had no rights. Now, again, I said to you that there will be a day when women, men, slaves, free, Greek, Jew, will all be one in Christ, and there will be no difference. While on earth, there are roles, and there are roles between men and women. And those roles will not, I do not think those roles will continue in heaven. So there will be no slaves bowing to their former masters in heaven. There will be no women bowing their head to their former austere husbands in their earthly lives. There will be none of that. Everyone will be equal. They will be free. Gender is something that is temporary. Jesus said that when people in heaven neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven, that kind of sexuality is something that is just simply earthly and not heavenly. Our male and female genders come from God, and God is neither male nor female, but both genders are reflect His nature. He created us male and female in His image, and the male part reflects His leadership, His strength, protection, etc. His the gender that He made women with, female, obviously, reflect compassion, care, nurture. These are all attributes of our Heavenly Father. Now, we refer to Him as Heavenly Father because that's what He told us to, and that's not negotiable. We do not call Him Mother. We never call Him Mother because that would be considered blasphemy, because that's not the way He wanted us to address Him. But just to say, God does not have gender. He created us in His image, and both male and female gender reflect His nature. Now, I know that you don't like the idea that women were the property of men. And I say property, it's practically speaking, okay? Women were not on their own. They couldn't go out and get jobs on their own and do all that stuff. And they had to stay at home, and they had to be subjective to their husbands. Well, that's the way it was. It's part of the curse. One day that curse will be gone. Interestingly, the United States is the one more than any other nation that has ushered in a new way of life. I think the world was groaning under the way things have been for so long. So God said, okay, people, you want freedom, you want liberty. Let's see what you do with it. And so hence all these liberty movements that happen in the United States. The question is, are we better off? Better in some ways, I suppose. Maybe far worse off in others. God knows. But all this is temporary. One day we'll be in heaven. There will be no roles. And everyone who is rewarded will be rewarded for what they have done for Christ here on earth. But in summation, God does not bless a rapist with the woman he grabbed a hold of and forced. He does not bless that man with getting to keep this woman the rest of his life. That's hogwash. It's just simply reflecting that humans are human beings with all the faults, and they do stupid things sometimes, and there's got to be a way of dealing with that, and that's what these verses talk about. So God bless, and I hope to see you soon. We will. Tomorrow I'm probably going to do another one. Take care. Bye-bye.